Good evening to you, Mr. Marshall, or I guess Iron, as if your friends would call you that.
Yeah, usual.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's begin, shall we?
Yes. I know you are a far more experienced and better historical YouTuber than me, so I'm just going to start this out. Why do you think the topics you cover are important to be heard?
Well, I think it's important that we learn from the past. For example, let's say the economic recession of 2008, right?
Yeah.
During that time, the recession was allowed to happen due to similar mistakes that we made during the Great Depression. Investments in stocks were made that were poorly researched, and that led to a complete disaster. And in 2009, we had too many banks investing in loans for people who wanted to buy houses and homes. Now we have a housing bubble because of that.
Yeah, I mean,
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I'm just going to go off that. I feel like people really like to pretend history doesn't impact today, like it doesn't matter, which is so annoying. People are like just willing to make the same mistakes because the year is different.
And yeah, I hear that too. And you're a channel that covers the Civil War, and you know that like the consequences of slavery and the consequences of how Reconstruction went so poorly after the war,
Yeah.
how that still affects us in many ways to this very day.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why you saw just the economy of the South was so dependent on slaves that they had to invent sharecropping just to keep it alive, and then it's more of just continuing to try to exploit African Americans specifically just to do it, and it was always just justified as we're not as bad as we once were.
Yes, I agree. And we still see the consequences of that today in the South, and even some of that echoes into the rest of the United States as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's cities, not cities. I know there are families that were wiped out during this war, and that's not as big a thing. But there were towns that suffered like 60% of all of their male people from like the age of 18 to 34 were just wiped out, and then it comes down to just reshaping politics till like Woodrow Wilson, I think, I know he was the first Democrat to win post-Civil War the presidency. I'm not 100% sure on the House and Senate, but reshaped politics for a while. It definitely impacts us today.
Yes, indeed. What's one thing that you think, like one historical event that probably impacts us the most today as a society?
One impact. I mean, I guess you could probably go for like
a string of events, you know.
Or like I mean, there's obvious answers to this, like the fall of the Roman Empire and that stuff. But just going for a less obscure one, I would probably say that if it wasn't for Philip II reforming his military, I know for a fact that there would be no Christianity.
Oh yes, and Christianity has played a major role in much of European history, and eventually that spread out to the rest of the world as well.
Yeah. I mean,
all culminating to the 30 Years' War.
I mean, you made a great video, and I think it's another important thing. The history impacts today, but people have this kind of feeling where they're like, I'm just like my ancestors, so what my ancestors did must be right. And I loved your video on the Ottoman Empire versus the Austrian Empire, and how
The Siege of Vienna.
yeah, and how there were Christians who fought in the Ottoman army, and there were Muslims who fought with the predominantly Holy League or Christian army, as we think about it. And it's not just that simple. History is never simple.
Yes, it's never that simple. And one of the points I made in that video was mostly to rebuke a lot of the people who were using it as like a defiant moment of Christianity against the evil Turks or whatever. I hate that kind of bastardization of truth that I think is very important, actually, in preserving history.
There are people who just want so badly to be seen as crusaders because, oh, look how strong they are. Look of how holy they are, without realizing, even, let's say they were... I mean, not only did they lose and were fools who bumbled around, but, they also were terrible to everyone. There was no great holy war where civilians were spared or enlightened. These people, even if you agree with 100% of their motivations, which you might not want to, but, these people, they massacred innocent Jews in the Rhineland massacres. They massacred innocent Christian peasants all the way through their travels. I mean, it's okay to have that in your past. You don't need to defend it. England doesn't need to pretend that their empire was good.
Oh, yes. Just because your country may have done something bad in the past doesn't mean you need to do some mental gymnastics to justify it. In the United States, I think that's a big problem right now, actually. We kind of do whitewash our history a little bit. If I'm going to be honest.
Oh yeah. Have you seen the TV show Timeless?
Don't think I have. I think I might have heard of it.
It's fairly fine, but there's this one point where they go and meet the Lone Ranger, and historically, the person that the Lone Ranger is based off of is black, and that was actually the first time I knew that. And I mean, that's a really kind of thing I should be taught, because I am not. The schools I went to were very much ingrained in teaching me that George Washington came to America in the year 1700, found no one else was here, stepped on board, and then lived peacefully with a bunch of Native Americans who had just popped up randomly, and we all got along fine. It's just not true.
So they kind of skipped the whole 1620s to Philip's War and the whole massacre that was.
Oh yeah. I wasn't until my 7th grade history class that they even brought up that Christopher Columbus was a genocidal enslaved or maniac.
Yeah, there is especially in our public education system, there is no rule or kind of set system for how the truth behind what we are taught.
Mm-hmm.
And looking for the right words here. So when we are taught some incorrect history like this, it kind of creates this image that we're the best, we don't do anything wrong, and that's the complete opposite. Sure, we've done great things, but our history's not exactly all peachy and everything. And I think that's important to learn. It's how we grow and develop as a nation, and and this, I think everyone else around the world can learn this too.
Man, I know I talk about the nerds about. I mean, this isn't exclusively an American thing. I know other countries do this from my very passing knowledge of their education system. Japan has an ongoing controversy with their textbooks and World War II. I know there's been problems with textbooks ranging from India to Brazil. I mean, this isn't just an American problem. It is a problem of every country in this arms race towards most moral country historically.
Or like exceptionalism, you could say.
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's very important that we preserve like the truth, and we keep that being taught. That was the word I'm looking for. We keep spreading that around. We keep teaching it. We keep letting them know that this is what actually happened. This is what academia agrees with. This is what researchers agree with. It's not a false image, you know.
I mean, I'm just thinking like the problem is, I think when it comes to looking at history, it is easy to get caught up in the pomp circumstance, like, oh, look how beautiful their uniforms were, look how great their guns were, look at all this stuff. And that is important. I think all of history is important, but it's so easy to not realize like there were people behind this, and like their suffering mattered. Like, sure, there was like, oh, the amazing Sherman tank, but there were people who charged up the beaches of Normandy who suffered, some lost their lives. And if we can preserve just, especially when I know we're both primarily talking about military history, if we can just preserve a little bit of that human tragedy that comes with every battle, I think that is a very important thing to do.
Like keeping focus on like the consequences socially, economically, and so forth, instead of just like, you know, weapons and uniforms and all the like little tiny glories that come with military history.
Yeah, because if taught incorrectly, history is propaganda. Like,
exactly,
the myth of the U.S. militia who were able to fight off against the British again all on their own, not about like our standing army under George Washington or the French. It led to a problem where the states all didn't realize like they needed each other, and that war had been fought like 5 minutes ago, and already just this revisionism was playing a problem for the creators of our nation.
Mm-hmm. And I did a video on one of our more forgotten allies, Spain, more particularly Bernardo de Galvez, and that video definitely does highlight some of that. I definitely think our allies in that war deserve some more recognition. And as you said about the states not really being unified yet, I think we could focus on that a bit more as well.
Yeah, I think I have definitely had, just to criticize myself, when I relay history, I kind of instinctively think how I'm going to make this interesting. And for a little bit, I wrote about a general in the Missouri State Guard who sided with the Confederacy, and I was talking about him, and I thought to myself, like, he did a good action. He let women get water and bring it to parched Union soldiers. And I was writing this, and I just had to think back to myself, like, this is a good action. I want to exemplify, like, the mercy of this action. But I had to go back. I had to go back and make. Yes, of course.
Sorry for seeing if that was a little bit abrupt, but I would like to comment on that. Like, what makes history interesting to me and to some other people is like these small heroic actions of people who actually went through some real, troubled times. It's different from a character in a book. These are real people, and they've done these things, and it serves as inspiration to people. And I think that's what we as historians, many of us, like about history.
That's quite interesting. Actually, I'm just saying, what got me into history was just the imagination I had for just being like, my favorite view of history, like in theory of history, is probably bottom up because I really like capturing that. And I don't want to like say like you're wrong. It's just I feel like we need to strip away the myth from the man with these historical figures because when I was describing this general, I was like talk about chivalry, and then I'm like going back and I'm like he was also a slaver, and the second I forgot about that, I was horrified by myself because that was how could I forget that? How could I talk about how valiant he is while he was also such a terrible person?
Yes, that's the complexities of people, and we must, we can highlight the Villian acts, but we also should, bring about their darker sides as well.
There's a question. What exactly made you want to start making historical videos?
Well, there were many subjects that I thought were very undercovered in the YouTube community, and many of them, I would see a lot of people make wrong assumptions and spread some wrong information about them because there was no knowledge of these subjects that I cover. There wasn't very much out there on them, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go. I don't care if I get like 5 views on a video. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna put this out here. Somebody maybe learn something about it.
I am very glad you did.
Yes, and thank you for complimenting me earlier when we started. I didn't. I really appreciate the compliment
Um,
because I don't really think of myself that way.
now, you have done something. You kind of. I didn't actually find your channel until you commented on mine, but when I looked at yours, it was kind of just this idea I had of what it would be like starting a YouTube channel. When I did, which was 6 months ago, I didn't think like I was going to be big, and I didn't actually start out doing the simple week by week. But when I saw you with, you were really good. You talked about history, you talked about these important points, and you did it without like the support of hundreds of thousands of people. And I just thought like you are proof that you don't need a huge budget in order to do this.
Yeah, I may be no armchair historian or whatever. I'm still here. I'm doing what a historian does. Oh, what was that?
Yeah.
I heard some like rubbing or something.
Yeah.
Oh.
So how do you, like, when you go through a script or editing, like, what do you do specifically to make sure that you aren't getting like the wrong idea across? Like, there are specific things you look for?
What I do is like I try to read through my script and think, I try to fact check as well. Like, is this really what I want to put in? Is this going to look interesting? But is this also going to portray the truth? Sometimes I can't always be accurate, but I try to be as much as possible.
It is a hard thing to do. You can't, as you said, you don't always do the most covered aspects of history. So I assume the sources you have are not the most abundant.
Mention, bust. I like to say, are there any myths here common myths that I can, just obliterate here?
Oh yeah, that's actually what got me started making videos. There was the simultaneous myth of Judeo-Bolshevism created by the Nazis, this other myth of Jews controlling and competing with capitalism. So I just was thinking to myself, like, I want to talk about what actually happened. And that's what got me started going, because these myths about history are hurtful. Right?
They do. Many in the public will believe it because many people, they don't do their own research like us. Like, we go on, we find articles, we read books, we watch many documentaries and such. But many people, they'll learn their history from a simple meme or maybe a questionable like 4-minute online video or something.
Or History Channel, which is something at this point.
Or they'll take what's in movies, like Enemy at the Gates. We all know the infamous Order 227.
Yeah. I have heard that repeated so many times. Because, I mean, there's the people, and I don't want to, like, discourage anyone from even getting into history. Like, if I'm about to talk about Hoi 4, like, if that's what got you into history, that's great. But, like, that can't be all you know about history.
Yeah, most people. I know that video games, being historical, they can definitely fuel the interest, but some people do rely on them. Like, you've probably heard the phrase, "I've learned more about history from video games than I have in school." And now I used to say that, but now I'm just kind of like, I don't know if that's really a good place to learn it from, but it's definitely a good way to fuel your interest.
I mean, I think that's what it talks about. You can learn about, here's what colored uniforms they have, here's the kinds of guns they had, but you don't get that personal.
You don't, especially with a war that Hearts of Iron covers, like World War II. It doesn't really teach you the consequences of everything, how this happened, why did this happen, what ways we can prevent it from happening again, or the outcomes of this. Which empires would fall, which ones would rise, what impact would that have?
I mean, also these games really stick away from the aspects that are less fun about history. I mean, there's games where you play as a World War II soldier, but there aren't as many games where you're a civilian who has to go through all of this. Or you're a person at home in the home front worrying that your father or husband is dying or captured.
Oh yes, that's definitely something that's very undercovered in these video games. But one game that I can think of that does cover this is Villian Hearts: The Great War. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that. But it's basically about a family of the soldier who was drafted into the German army. His father-in-law enlists in the French army to try to find him. And throughout the game, you see like the effects of the war on the soldiers, civilians. It's actually a pretty tear-jerking game. If you haven't played it, I'd recommend looking at that. That's a good game.
I'll have to check it out.
It's a very good historical game. As you were saying?
How I feel like when we talk about how important history is, there's also this idea, because when you think about history, you're like, oh, I wish I was in the 1920s, or I wish I was born during the 1700s. I feel like there's also idea that if you were just born there, oh, I would be the king or I would be a prince. And I feel like another topic.
Like, no, you wouldn't.
Oh yeah, I mean, I can tell you from my family, there is no prince, noble blood in me. I come from bankers, someone who was in charge of hens, and some farmers from Ireland. I do not see myself becoming a duke or a prince.
Exactly. If you did go back in time where you thought it was much better, you clearly haven't learned enough about that time period, because you would probably be a peasant or some lower class worker or something.
I mean, when people say learn from history, what they're not saying is let's go back to the Roman Empire with Colosseum games and mass slavery. What they're more trying to say is look how the Roman Empire fell with demagogues and corruption.
Exactly. I agree 100%. I think a lot of people do get the wrong message when they say like know your history. Like you've seen that new Call of Duty game that's coming out, right? Like how it has that whole how it has that whole thing as a theme.
The Cold War one?
Yeah, the Cold War one.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to distinguish between those games.
Yeah. Which, I mean, actually, just one thing, if I could divert. Call of Duty World War II, I think, was the first mainstream game to actually even reference the Holocaust, which is kind of mind-boggling because it is so connected to World War II. But I guess games just didn't find it profitable or didn't know exactly how to approach the topic. And I mean, they didn't do it as good as maybe they could have, but just being the first one to mention the greatest genocide, and I use greatest as in biggest, not as in good in any way, of all time just seems, a little weird and uncomfortable and not something that should have taken this long.
I mean, I agree with you on that a little bit, but they also these companies, they don't really want to offend anybody. They don't really want to lose any money. That's why they haven't been doing it. Yeah. But I definitely think having some of that more human side of war in there, because you and I discuss military history mostly, but I think having some of that human side of war might open up new perspective onto for some people on these events. Yeah, like damn.
No, I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, it's good. It's good.
So, what do you want to say about the latest Call of Duty game?
I'm not sure what they're even trying to do with the message of know your history. Yeah, because it seems to do a lot with the Cold War, but what do we do with this? Are we saying go back to the Cold War kind of times and be like in the Red Scare again?
Right.
I'm just kind of confused about what it's trying to, what message it's trying to bring over.
Because, I mean, the Cold War is so varied and so long, ranging from our weird relationship with the Middle East in the 1950s to the Vietnam War to the post-Watergate scandal. I mean, even if you're talking about it truthfully, I mean, how would you exactly do that in a game?
Exactly. Because, all right, so what morals are you trying to give to the audience, the players?
I mean, I feel like their answer to us would be, we just want to sell a game, which is, I mean, I guess as a company, they're prerogative, but maybe it shouldn't be what we settle for. Maybe we should want more from these kinds of things. I mean, we also probably want way more from public education.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. It's just a side note that I wanted to bring up a little bit.
Well, I mean, it certainly does relate because history is it's not like math where math you use sometimes arithmetic. I mean, I don't think you use trigonometry that much, but you could go most of your life without math impacting you post sixth grade in any big way. But history is just so baked into everything that you really can't live a full life without knowing it.
Could you repeat that quick? Your mic cut out a little bit during that.
Oh, my bad. What I was just trying to say is that history impacts so much of our lives that you really need the correct and pretty good picture of it if you are to understand the world.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, like just today, there was a conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan that it's so baked up into the history of that region that if you don't really understand it, it's the equivalency of reading that two fictional nations fought each other. Because, I mean, it is complicated, but it's also really important to understand why people are willing to fight and die over these things.
Yeah, and some of that goes back to way back to European colonization of that region, right?
Yeah, it goes back to all the way with Russia. It goes actually even farther back with Christianization of that area and then Islam coming in through Iran. Like just reading over it again, they were referencing like the 5th century kings and then later on Iran being at war with, well, pre-Iran, the
Like
Persian area.
Persia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fighting with the Ottomans and how that impacts the region. I mean, it's all interconnected. It is.
yeah, like these events from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right? Like they still connect with us today. It makes our society what it is now, and that's why one of the things that I think history is so important for.
I mean, history, both recent, like World War II, which is the reason why my family exists. My parents both came from Europe, and my grandparents all came from different regions. If it wasn't for World War II and forcing them as refugees to America, it wouldn't exist. And it goes as far back as just the English invading Cyprus is still causing problems in that region.
Yeah, they're still very divided today.
Yeah.
And then, many of our families probably wouldn't exist because of from World War II. Because after World War II, you had the baby boom,
Yeah.
and that definitely had our population skyrocketing for a long time. I mean, is there anything else you would like to bring up or mention?
Uh, if I was just going to finish this off, though, I will want you to have the final word with this, since I think you are more knowledgeable in more general kinds of history. And I'm really glad you brought up the 2008 thing. But just when you learn history, think of it as how it connects to just the rest of the world. Think about if this went just slightly different, how would that change everything? You start to see why it's so important for us to learn about it and for us to truly understand what it means as an event that happened in our world.
Oh yes, like many things that could have been changed even slightly could have had a huge effect on how we look at them today, how our society is now.
So, do you have any final words you want to say? Do you have any final words you want to say, or
More discussions with you if I. Any final words? Not exactly. Is my mic cutting out?
a little bit?
God damn it. I think it's because I'm uploading something right now. Yep.
Well, anyways, it has been.
Yeah. Otherwise, I don't really have anything big to say. But history is important.
Well,
it really is.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. It has been quite an enjoyment talking with you.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this too. It's nice to see another younger guy on YouTube making good history content. I really enjoy your series. I really enjoy all the other stuff you do, and hopefully we keep seeing you improve. Hopefully, I can keep improving as well because I still have a lot that I need to work on too. I really enjoyed coming on here. Thank you for your time, and that's it.
Thank you for yours.
See you later.
See ya.